whack. Early picture bang, lean, bang, shoulder, and bop.
Out of what's estimated to be thousands of hours of private rehearsal footage recorded across Michael Jackson's career, only a small handful of clips have ever actually leaked, surfaced, or been quietly released to the public. I went through the rarest ones that exist and ranked them, from strange to genuinely hard to believe. Number 1 on this list isn't the most famous clip you'll recognize. It's the one that, once you understand what's actually happening in it, changes the way you watch every finished performance he ever gave. 10 pieces of footage. 1 countdown. Let's rank them. Think about that number for a second before we even start. Thousands of hours, and only a handful of minutes have ever made it out into public view. That means everything you're about to see on this list represents an almost impossibly small fraction of what actually exists somewhere, locked in a vault, a private collection, or an archive nobody's fully catalogued yet. What we do have access to, though, is more than enough to completely rewrite how you think about the word effortless. Before we start, one quick note on how this ranking works. This isn't ordered by fame or by how many views a clip has gotten online. It's ranked by something harder to fake, how much it reveals about the actual work happening behind the finished product, and how physically or technically insane the thing being tested actually was. Some of the most famous rehearsal clips floating around barely crack this list. Some of the least talked about ones rank shockingly high. Stick around, because the gap between expectation and reality here is bigger than you'd think. A few pieces of footage almost made this list and deserve a quick mention before we start counting down, because leaving them out entirely would be a disservice. Footage from a private studio in 1991 shows Michael sitting on the floor, watching traditional cultural dancers demonstrate movement styles from entirely different parts of the world, attempting unfamiliar footwork himself and laughing openly whenever he gets it wrong. It didn't crack the countdown because it isn't really about technical difficulty at all, it's about humility, a global superstar willingly looking imperfect in front of people he clearly respected. There's also a widely debated clip allegedly showing him continuing to rehearse through visible pain after injuring a leg during a demanding sequence. Whether that specific footage is fully authentic is still argued over by people who study this stuff closely, so it stays off the official ranking, but the story attached to it, true or exaggerated, says something real about the standard he held himself to. And footage from a freezing overseas soundcheck, where he quietly runs through smooth footwork alone on an empty stage bundled in a heavy sweatshirt, missed the cut purely because nothing about it is technically extreme. It's just quiet, meditative, and strangely beautiful, which on a list ranked by raw difficulty, unfortunately, doesn't count for much. Keep all 3 of those in mind. We'll circle back to what they represent right before we close this out. Now, on to the official countdown. Number 10. A strange, almost eerie clip from the late 1980s showing Michael standing completely motionless inside a starkly lit room, holding extremely specific, dramatic poses for minutes at a time without a single twitch. This wasn't dance rehearsal in the traditional sense. It was a measurement session, conducted so an artist could build an incredibly lifelike wax figure of him for public display. Watch him hold a dramatic toe stand freeze or a sharply angled arm extension, completely still, while somewhere off camera someone studies every inch of muscle definition and proportion. It ranks at the bottom of this list only because it's the least kinetic clip here, but don't let that fool you. The sheer physical control required to hold an explosive-looking pose without moving a single muscle for minutes on end is its own kind of insane, just a quieter kind than everything else coming up. Think about how differently we usually watch him. Every other clip on this list is defined by motion, speed, momentum. This one is the exact opposite, and somehow it's just as revealing, because holding stillness with that kind of controlled tension takes almost as much core strength as the explosive movements it's usually paired against. Number 9. Rare footage from a cramped rehearsal space in the late 1970s, showing a teenage Michael working through sharp, theatrical jazz movements for a stage role that required him to move like something other than human. Dressed in plain sweats, nothing about his appearance hints at what's coming later in his career. What earns this clip a spot on the list isn't fame, it's almost completely unknown to casual fans, it's the sheer physical vocabulary already forming. He throws his body deliberately off balance, then snaps back into a rigid, controlled position with zero wasted movement, testing exactly how far a human body can bend before it stops reading as human at all. It's early. It's rough around the edges. But watching it now, knowing everything that came after, It's genuinely unsettling how much of his signature control was already fully formed before anyone outside that room had any idea who he'd eventually become. There's a specific moment in this footage, easy to miss on a first watch, where he catches his own reflection mid-movement and pauses just slightly, almost studying himself the way a scientist studies a result. That single half-second says more about his mindset at that age than an entire interview could. Number 8. Footage from a family rehearsal hall in the early 1980s, capturing preparation for a major arena tour. On paper, this sounds like the least remarkable clip on this entire list, a group rehearsal, nothing unusual. Watch it closely, though, and one performer keeps breaking slightly ahead of the formation, already testing sharper, more angular movement techniques the rest of the group hadn't adopted yet. He repeatedly stops the run-through, not out of frustration but precision, fixing minor spacing issues with the instinct of someone already thinking like a director rather than a group member. It ranks this high because of what it captures accidentally, a solo career quietly assembling itself in real time, inside footage that was never meant to document anything except a group rehearsal. Nobody holding the camera that day thought they were filming the birth of a solo icon. They thought they were filming a family act preparing for a tour. That's exactly what makes footage like this so valuable decades later. It wasn't staged for historical significance, it just happened to capture it by accident. Number 7. Behind-the-scenes footage from the guarded set of a 1986 3D theme park film project, showing Michael running choreography while wearing a heavy, restrictive prototype of a futuristic costume. Filming for stereoscopic 3D cameras required rethinking almost everything about depth, spacing, and angle, and he had to solve all of that while physically weighed down by gear that fought against every movement. Alongside dancers dressed as alien creatures, he reworks familiar popping sequences to punch through the bulk of the suit, adjusting his angles so his signature hand isolations still land clearly through an unfamiliar camera setup. It ranks above the earlier clips because of the layered difficulty involved, not just performing under pressure, but performing under pressure while fighting his own costume and an entirely new filming technology at the same time. Most dancers struggle to adjust choreography for a single new variable. Here, he's solving for 3 at once, unfamiliar depth perception created by 3D cameras, a heavy restrictive suit fighting every isolation, and a completely alien creative environment surrounded by extraterrestrial costumed dancers instead of his usual crew. Very few performers would treat that combination as a minor inconvenience rather than a genuine crisis. Number 6. A gritty rehearsal captured in a Mirrorline studio in 1987, showing Michael working through an aggressive, street-informed face-off sequence for a subway set video, stripped of his heavy stage jackets and working purely in basic rehearsal clothes. The entire session is built around sudden stops and sharp weight transfers, every rapid spin and dramatic jacket pull motion drilled until it reads as pure attitude rather than choreography. What pushes this clip up the list is the reinvention happening inside it. This wasn't a performer polishing an existing identity. It was someone deliberately absorbing an entirely different street dance culture from scratch and refining it fast enough to headline a world tour within months. That kind of turnaround, from unfamiliar movement vocabulary to global stadium headliner, usually takes performers years, not months, and this footage is the only real evidence that the transition wasn't instant or effortless the way the finished album campaign made it look. Watching it, you get the sense of someone essentially starting over from a lower rung on purpose, willing to look a little unpolished in a rehearsal room in order to come out the other side completely transformed on an actual world stage, which is a far riskier creative decision than simply layering a new sound over an old, comfortable identity. Number 5. A rare, almost entirely silent piece of footage from a private studio in 1992, capturing the earliest structural build of one of his most technically demanding routines. Working alongside 2 trusted choreographers, Michael spends most of this clip in near total silence, broken only by the sharp clap of hands and the snap of a necktie, obsessing over the exact geometric angle of a single arm gesture. This footage ranks in the top half of the list because of what it exposes. Routines that look effortlessly cool and mechanical in the finished version were actually built through hours of borderline mathematical debate over fractions of a movement, stripped completely of the iconic suits and hats that would later sell the illusion of pure natural swagger. Watching 3 grown men argue quietly over a single half-second of arm movement, replaying it, adjusting it, replaying it again, tells you everything about why that routine still gets studied by dancers decades later. Nothing in it was improvised. Every angle was earned through repetition most audiences would find almost boring to witness firsthand. That's the uncomfortable truth buried in a lot of this footage. The process behind genius is frequently tedious, repetitive, unglamorous work, and the magic only shows up once all of that tedium gets stripped away and replaced with a spotlight, a costume, and a crowd screaming loud enough to drown out the memory of how many takes it actually took to get there. Number 4. Footage shot inside a completely empty stadium ahead of a major televised halftime performance in the early 1990s, and this one is unusual because almost nothing happens in it. Michael stands frozen on a small central platform for an extended stretch, testing how a motionless silhouette would actually register from the highest, furthest seats in the building while camera operators track angles around him. He does not move. Not once. This clip ranks this high specifically because it proves a level of understanding most performers never reach, that total stillness, engineered with total precision, can hit an audience just as hard as an explosive, high-energy routine, provided everything around it is timed perfectly. Most artists preparing for the biggest stage of their career spend their rehearsal time perfecting movement. Here, the rehearsal time is spent perfecting the absence of movement, treating stillness itself as a piece of choreography worth testing, adjusting, and getting exactly right before 90 million people watched it happen live. It's almost counterintuitive when you think about it, the biggest stage of his life, and the rehearsal footage shows him working hardest on the one thing that looks the simplest, standing perfectly still, because he understood that a stadium audience reads confidence and control in stillness just as clearly as they read it in motion, and getting that wrong in front of that many people wasn't an option. Number 3. Rehearsal footage from the set of one of the most expensive music videos ever produced, showing Michael working through tightly synchronized, sharp-edged choreography alongside his sister on the stark, futuristic set itself. Dressed comfortably instead of in full costume, the two of them move through the routine with an obvious, lifelong sibling synergy, trading small smiles and light moments between takes that never made it anywhere near the final cut. It ranks this high not purely for technical difficulty, but for rarity of a completely different kind, two of the most watched performers on the planet, working together privately, with zero audience, behaving like exactly what they were underneath the fame, family. There's a moment in this footage where one of them misses a beat, laughs, and the other one immediately mirrors the laugh instead of getting frustrated, and it's a small enough moment that it would never have survived into any official cut, but it's exactly the kind of detail that makes rehearsal footage worth more than the polished final product in the first place. It's easy to forget, watching two icons perform a hyper-stylized futuristic routine on television, that underneath the choreography was simply two siblings who'd been dancing together their entire lives, and this clip is really the only surviving proof of what that actually looked like once the cameras weren't rolling for the official release. Number 2. Grainy, private, shot on a home camera in early 1983, this piece of footage shows Michael completely alone in a home studio, running the exact solo routine that would, within weeks, be watched by roughly half the television-owning population of an entire country during a single broadcast. No glove. No spotlight. No crowd. Just him, gliding backward across the floor, stopping, resetting his weight, and trying it again, chasing the precise timing of a heel drop that would eventually be known worldwide simply as the moonwalk. There's no music playing in some of the surviving versions of this clip, just the sound of his shoes against the floor. It ranks this high because of pure historical weight. This isn't just rare rehearsal footage. It's arguably the single most important piece of dance rehearsal footage that exists from the entire 20th century, and almost nobody outside of serious collectors has ever actually seen it. Consider what's actually captured here for a second. Not a performance. Not even a full rehearsal in the traditional sense. Just one man, alone, quietly reverse engineering an illusion so convincing that people would spend the next 4 decades arguing about how it was physically possible, using nothing but a carpeted floor and pure repetition. No professional choreographer in the room to guide him, no team of engineers, no cameras rolling for a broadcast. Just trial and error, alone, until the trick worked well enough to convince an entire planet a few weeks later that gravity itself had briefly stopped applying to him. Which brings us to number 1. Filmed in a highly secure workshop in late 1987, this footage documents the earliest testing phase of the forward-leaning illusion that would go on to stun global audiences the following year. Before the specialized shoes and floor mechanisms had been finalized, someone had to figure out how a human body could physically survive tilting forward at an angle that looks completely impossible without simply falling on his face. This clip reportedly shows Michael strapped into a rough early harness prototype, slowly testing his own center of gravity while quietly communicating with engineers about the building strain in his ankles and calves. There is nothing effortless about any of it. What you're actually watching is raw, dangerous, unglamorous physical risk, real strain on a real body, sitting directly underneath one of the most celebrated optical illusions in the history of live performance. It earns the top spot on this list because of exactly what it destroys, the illusion itself. Once you've seen this footage, you can never again watch the finished version the same way. You're not watching a magic trick anymore. You're watching a man who nearly fell flat on his face dozens of times in private so that the version the world eventually saw could look like it defied gravity without any effort at all. Think about the sheer nerve required just to keep going after the first failed attempt. Most people testing an untested harness rig, feeling real strain building in their ankles with every attempt, would have quietly abandoned the idea after a handful of tries. This footage reportedly shows attempt after attempt, adjustment after adjustment, a slow, methodical refusal to accept that the trick simply couldn't be done safely until eventually it could. So there's the ranking, from a silent wax figure measurement session all the way up to a harness strapped around a man's chest as he tested how far his own body could lean before physics won. But there's one more piece of footage worth mentioning before we wrap this up, and it didn't crack the top 10 only because it's less about a single technical breakthrough and more about scale. Filmed inside a massive aircraft hangar in 1996, this clip shows Michael directing dozens of newly recruited dancers through an aggressive, military-style drill routine, using the enormous open acoustics of the empty hangar to judge exactly how synchronized footsteps would sound once amplified inside a packed stadium. He stops the routine again and again, demanding that every single dancer hit their mark within the same fraction of a second. It's less about one man's body defying limits and more about one man's standards refusing to bend for anyone else's, even when there were dozens of people in the room instead of just himself. What's striking about this clip compared to everything else on the list is the shift in scale. Every other entry in this countdown is fundamentally about one body solving one problem. This one is about a single mindset being enforced across dozens of bodies at once, proving that the same obsessive standard he held for himself in an empty room got applied just as ruthlessly once an entire cast was standing in front of him. Here's what's genuinely strange once you watch all 10 of these clips back to back in order. The technical difficulty barely correlates with fame at all. The most famous piece of footage from this entire list, the private moonwalk rehearsal, ranks second, not first, because as historically massive as it is, it still doesn't involve the same level of raw physical danger as a man testing an anti-gravity harness for the very first time. Virality and actual difficulty, it turns out, rarely line up the way you'd expect, and that gap is exactly why rankings like this one matter. They force you to look past what got famous and start asking what actually should have. It's the same reason a quiet, silent tie snap rehearsal outranks a much more visually exciting group tour clip on this list. Fame gets built on what audiences eventually see and fall in love with. This ranking is built on something closer to what actually cost the most, physically and mentally, to get right in the first place, and those two things are almost never the same clip. There's also a pattern running underneath every single clip on this list that's easy to miss on a first watch. None of this footage shows someone performing for an audience. Every single frame captures a man solving a problem completely alone, or with a tiny trusted circle of collaborators, with absolutely no consideration for how it looked to anyone outside that room. The wax figure clip, the harness test, the silent tie snap rehearsal, the frozen stadium silhouette test, all of it shares the exact same DNA. Total indifference to being watched, total obsession with getting the mechanics exactly right before anyone else was allowed anywhere near it. That's a very different definition of showmanship than most people assume. The show wasn't the point of any of this footage. The engineering behind the show was. And that's worth remembering the next time you watch any of his finished performances, because what looks like effortless charisma on stage is almost always the visible tip of an enormous amount of invisible, unglamorous labor that happened somewhere nobody was filming, or in the rare cases when someone was, footage that took decades to ever resurface publicly. Go back to those 3 honorable mentions from earlier for a second: the cultural dance workshop, the disputed injury footage, the freezing overseas sound check. None of them made the official countdown, but together they round out a picture the top 10 alone can't fully capture. Rehearsal footage like this isn't just about proving how hard something was physically. Sometimes it's about humility, sitting on a studio floor willing to look clumsy in front of people you respect. Sometimes it's about grit, questionable authenticity or not, the sheer idea of continuing to work through pain becoming part of the mythology either way. And sometimes it's about something much quieter than any of that, a man alone on an empty, freezing stage, singing softly to himself with absolutely nobody around to perform for, simply because the work itself was the point, not the applause waiting for it later. It's worth sitting with what that actually means for a career built almost entirely around spectacle. Every single iconic moment on this list, the lean, the moonwalk, the frozen stadium silhouette, the sibling duet, the tie snap, existed first as a private failure, tested and adjusted somewhere nobody was ever supposed to see, long before it became something millions of people would eventually recognize instantly. The polish came later. The risk, the confusion, the trial and error, the actual work, all of that happened first, quietly, in rooms that were never built for an audience at all. Every clip on this countdown is, in its own way, a receipt for exactly how much invisible effort sits underneath a career most people only ever experienced as pure, effortless magic. So if you had to rank these 10 clips yourself, would the harness test really take the top spot for you, or would the home video moonwalk rehearsal win purely on historical weight alone? There's no wrong answer here, and that's honestly the most interesting part of digging through footage like this. Rarity, danger, historical importance, emotional weight, they don't always point toward the same clip, and the moment you start actually comparing them side by side is the moment you realize just how much preparation was quietly buried underneath every single iconic performance this man ever gave. Somewhere out there, in a vault or a private collection nobody's catalogued yet, there's almost certainly footage that would blow every single clip on this list completely out of the water. Until that surfaces, though, this is about as close as anyone gets to watching the real work happen, unfiltered, unpolished, and entirely unaware that anyone would ever be ranking it decades later.